Alright, hello everyone. This video is going to be an alternate election map for 1988 between Biden and Trump. Uh, this is what I think the results would have been if it were between them two in 1988. So yeah, I believe in 1988 Trump was still a registered Republican. He did change it a few times. He even became a Democrat, and then he went back to an independent and then Republican. But I think in 1988 he was still a Republican. So yeah, um, in 1988, Biden was a pretty weak candidate. He had to drop out of the primary because of plagiarism, so he was pretty weak, and he was, I think, much more moderate on issues back in 1988 than he is now. Uh, his Democrat Party back in 1988 was quite different. Um, it was much more white and conservative back in 1988. The Democrat Party. So yeah, and Trump in 1988, he was known as like a really rich guy, but that's about it. So he had some popularity. So yeah, so here are the safe states for the Republican in 1988 for Trump. Indiana, Kentucky, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, no, not West Virginia, Virginia, Florida, Texas, 29 electoral votes back in that time, Oklahoma, Kansas, Mississippi, Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, the Dakotas, Wyoming, Idaho, Utah, Arizona, and Colorado at the time was like a safe red state. And then obviously we had migration from California, and that shifted to state blue. Uh, and then we have Vermont. That's a and that's weird, but I think Vermont back in 1988 was a pretty red state. They constantly elected Republicans. It wasn't until 1992 where it finally flipped to being a Democrat state. Uh, and also, I believe Maine, because Maine at the time was Maine and New Hampshire. I think these three states would be safe for the for Trump because it's quite because back in the day, like obviously liberal secular New England had a place in the Republican Party, and they would vote. Republicans had liberal Republicans and conservative Republicans, so the New Englanders would probably vote for the Republican candidate because at the time they were pretty well associated with them. And then obviously that's the Republican Party became more conservative and dominated by evangelicals. They moved away and they moved towards the Democrats. Uh, yeah. Um, for the safe Biden states, like these states in '88, there aren't a lot honestly, because I think Biden would be a really weak candidate. So I think Rhode Island, Massachusetts. I don't know. I don't think Massachusetts to be safe. I think Biden went his home state Delaware. Oh yeah, DC, Iowa. I think would be safe. Minnesota. Uh, I think it's about safe blue, safe D states in '88. Uh, maybe Massachusetts. I'm not sure that would be. Yeah, I'll put Massachusetts. Uh, and okay, so uh, I think for the rest of the states now. So I think Louisiana would narrowly go for Trump. Arkansas would narrowly go for Trump. Tennessee would narrowly go for Trump. These states were quite purple back in the day. Actually, quite Democrat leaning. They all had Democrat senators and Democrat state governments. That changed obviously. Now they have Republicans, but Missouri back in the day was a bellwether state. That would narrowly go for Trump, I think. Montana, uh, uh, um, oh yeah, New Mexico, Nevada, I think it was quite. It used to vote Republican a lot, I think back in the day. California, I think this was before demographic change because California is a very diverse state now. Demographics just don't like Republicans. Back in the day, California was a pretty white conservative state. So that would go for Trump. Illinois. Illinois used to have a Republican lean to it back in the day. It would frequently be won by Republicans, or it would be narrow. Remember, Reagan's popularity here Reagan's a lot of these red states victories would be because of Reagan's popularity. A lot of them like Reagan, so obviously the next Republican in this scenario would be Trump. They would probably expect him to be like Reagan. Um, Ohio, that would be narrow. It wasn't as red as it is now. Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, no, Michigan, would go for for Trump. Back in the day, these states were these states were, this was the last time, I think a Rust Belt state would go to Republican until 2016, and Trump finally won it. Uh, I think in this scenario, I think Trump would win Wisconsin because Biden wouldn't appeal to the Rust Belt. He was very unpopular there. Uh, I think West Virginia would go Democrat because at the time West Virginia was like a really blue state, and now it's a really red state. But I guess when Democrats they shifted it away from coal miners, and yeah, that's why West Virginia shifted politically. Maryland, obviously very blue state, but I think in this timeline, I think in this alternate case it would go Republican because Reagan's popularity and it was much more winnable in '88 in a Republican environment. New Jersey also used to be a pretty reliably Republican state. It's a northeastern liberal state, but it was pretty reliably Republican. That would go Trump into the Trump column. Um, and then I think Oregon. Bush didn't win it. I think Trump, with his celebrity status, I think he would win it. Uh, let's see. Oh yeah, and I think Connecticut would go Republican because obviously back in the day, New England states, Connecticut was a pretty winnable state for the Republicans. At the Senate level, it went solidly Democrat, but at the presidential level, the liberals were willing to vote for Republicans because obviously they were still part of the Republican Party at the time. They weren't alienated like they were in the 2000s when the Republicans moved more right. Uh, and then New York, this would be Trump's home state at this time. Reagan won it in '84. I don't think Trump would win it if he ran in '88 because New York still had that at this time it had a Democrat leaning to it. Uh, it would be kind of close though. Washington, I think in this scenario, Washington, Trump would win Washington, uh, because because uh because the state Washington was used to be a much more purple state, and I think Trump would have enough in a Republican environment, with obviously Reagan on his side. Uh, the obviously some of the white liberals in the state, I think would jump over the line and vote Republican. Uh, However, that would be like extremely tilt. That would be extremely tilt. That would be like 0.01. That would be the margin. Uh, because at the time, the like the Seattle, the urban areas weren't like solidly weren't like solidly blue. I wouldn't know. They weren't like really polarized. So yeah. And then Alaska. Oh yeah, that was a safe. I forgot to put that. And then Hawaii would go for Biden, I think. So this would be the map in my prediction. Uh, so Trump Trump would win all but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 states, and this is all because obviously Reagan. The people wanted a Reagan third term, not a Bush, H.W. Bush first term. So yeah. Um. Hope you guys found this video interesting, and I'll talk to you guys next time. See ya.